Good morning. My name is Megan Victor, and today I will be discussing historical archaeology within the context of a game known as the Elder Scrolls Online. Now, before we get into the paper itself, I'm going to give you a brief overview of today's talk. First, we'll have a short introduction to the subfield of archaeogaming itself. We'll then move on to the case study of the Elder Scrolls Online and its Antiquities system. We'll take a look at one example of the way that archaeology works within Tamriel and the way that it fits within the historical narrative of Tamriel and its scholars. We'll then move in to see what more we as archaeologists can learn from ESO's Antiquities system and whether there's room for improvement. And finally, what's next in terms of future research and how this case study and archaeogaming as a whole can advance historical archaeology's aims, especially among the public. Archaeogaming falls within the larger study of play and the larger study of games and gaming, known as ludology or game studies. Now, examining how people play can help archaeologists understand how societies view leisure time and socializing. Examining the purpose of play can help us as archaeologists understand wider cultural patterns because play itself can work to reflect or subvert these broader cultural trends. Further, the games that we choose to play as individuals or as a culture really are a reflection of our choices and the trade networks to which we have access. Archaeologists have found centuries of evidence of games, from tabletop games and games of strategy to sporting events, and video games are no different. They're just the latest in a long line. So what is archaeogaming specifically? Well, as this image indicates, it's a lot. There's a lot that goes on. It's an interdisciplinary conception, and there's a lot to unpack. But rather than doing that here, we're going to focus on the key aspects of archaeogaming. Namely, it's the intersection of archaeology as a field and games, and for the purpose of this talk, video games specifically. There's three main aspects to it: the archaeology of video games, the archaeology of the cultures and peoples within video games, and the portrayal of archaeology and archaeologists within those games. So that first aspect really looks at the materiality of video games. It looks at everything that is needed to design and to play a video game. So all of the CDs and discs and cartridges and instruction manuals that go into being a good gamer, all the consoles and PCs that are needed to design and to test and to play the games, and also all of the paraphernalia and memorabilia that are associated with being a fan of these games, with being a part of a larger gamer subculture. This second aspect is an examination of the digital world of video games, literally the culture and peoples that inhabit it. And it's using an archaeological lens. So it's applying an archaeologist's toolkit to digital cultures instead of what we would consider potentially real life cultures. And so researchers conduct survey and excavations through digital means with a focus on those peoples within the built world of the game. There's an added layer of analysis as well, which is that this examination also helps to better understand the cultures of the players of the video games and the game developers themselves. By studying digital and fictional uses of space and settlement patterns, resource extraction, and cultural interactions, we can understand how we as a culture may perceive the past, how we can better appeal narratives of the past as a concept to broader audiences, and also what it is that certain cultures place as objects of power or as items that are viewed as high status, so much so that they get transferred over into the digital world. Final thing is the portrayal of archaeology within video games. So this examination literally looks at archaeologists and excavations, the so-called antiquities or artifacts that are recovered, sites and ruins that are present, and often this sort of strong academic overtones that seem to affect it. It also looks at whether or not there's a distinction between archaeology and looting or treasure hunting. At what point does excavation become treasure hunting? At what point does exploration become excavation? Now, the case study at hand is the Elder Scrolls Online. This is produced by ZeniMax Online Studios. And in particular, what we're looking at is the Antiquities system, which was first introduced in April of 2020. Now, it combines two of the key aspects of archaeogaming: the portrayal of archaeology, archaeologists, and artifacts, and an examination of the deep pasts and cultures of the fictional society of ESO's world, which is known as Tamriel. Now, the Antiquities system, it invites players to travel across Tamriel to recover lost artifacts so that they can uncover the hidden history and become a world-renowned archaeologist. One of the ways that players can do this is actually rather uncommon in a video game, and it's through desktop survey, something much more commonly seen in historical archaeology and in cultural resource management. Now, traditionally, in these fields, historic maps and aerial surveys are used to better understand a study area or to identify a possible site location. In ESO, the player searches for a site location through a mini game connecting various points together in a limited number of turns. If they run out of turns, they end up with a broader number of search areas they will have to wade through. And this sort of echoes real life archaeology, where the more data that can be cross referenced, the less potential areas have to be waded through. And so at the top here, you can see this is a place where the player had run out of turns, and so they did not have enough data connected. There's a question mark up here, so there's several places they're going to have to search to try and find where the site is. Whereas down here, this bottom one, it's very clear that they're going to arrive in their survey area and then they can look for their site. And here's a side-by-side comparison. On the left, this is a desktop survey. This is the predicted survey area, and in theory, the projected dig site is somewhere within there. On the right, this is the survey area, and the projected dig site is somewhere in there. This one is from ESO. Now, once you get to that spot and it's time for the excavation, there are some pretty strong similarities in methodology. The site is gridded off as a large square, and dirt's removed in layers, and it's done through smaller squares. The toolkit is also incredibly familiar. Our handy trowel is present, along with brushes and a shovel. Now, as we archaeologists know, larger tools remove more dirt, and they do this in this game too, but they run the risk of destroying the site and breaking artifacts. Smaller, gentler tools remove far less dirt, but you run the risk of running out of time, an ever-present problem in archaeology. The excavations in ESO last until sundown generally, unless you break an artifact. If you break an artifact, the excavation ends immediately, and this is noteworthy in a game not otherwise focused on archaeology. Otherwise, you have until sundown. And this is also something that echoes archaeological excavations around the world, where so often we are scrambling to take that last feature photo or to finish that last excavation level while we still have light. Similarly, there's a lab-based research component and a scholarly consultation aspect within ESO. After every successful excavation, whether or not the player wants to, the recovered item must go to the Antiquarian Circle at Tamriel's University of Gwillem. Here, the circle is consistent of male and female members from a variety of different in-game cultures and different socioeconomic upbringings. They even make a point to have an accomplished scholar who is wheelchair bound. And these members take into account the artifact's location, any extant documentary record, and any oral history, sometimes contributing it themselves, before giving what they would see as the full history of the object. Now, here we can see archaeology at work. Why do archaeology? Well, As they tell us, common everyday objects can teach us more than rare objects some might consider valuable. And they say we seek the truth above all else. Written history is rarely given an honest accounting of the past. So here's one example. There's a lot of text on this slide. This is the back and forth of the different scholars, and I'm going to summarize it here. So read only at your own leisure. This focuses on a crystal decanter that comes from a place in the game that is the home to the perfection valuing culture. The first scholar to take a look at the object when it comes is absolutely flummoxed because it doesn't seem to fit the culture where it was found. It's made of a fine material, but it's shoddy. The second person weighs in that the material does indeed come from that location and that it likely didn't start out as shoddy. They think that perhaps it's been a repurposed vessel because this culture does use this material and they do use it for hollowware vessels. And maybe its shoddy appearance is because it was melted down and reshaped. It's only once someone with insider in-group knowledge, a member of the community, speaks up that we get a positive identification on truly what this decanter is. A member of the culture itself speaks up and says that this is indeed made from a precious material with a lot of cultural significance, and it was shattered. And after being shattered, it was fashioned into a decanter. This was meant only for personal use. And this is why it has this resonance, because it has this insider knowledge to it. Something that, at a glance, we would not have gotten from looking at the vessel, and something that we would not have gotten simply from talking to the other two scholars. It took that community consultation. So the historical archaeological methodology is seen most in this circle's consultations because historical archaeology is multi-scalar in its approach. It looks at daily lives and the behaviors of a wide variety of individuals while also looking at the way that they interact with one another. And this can be seen again and again when these scholars interact with one another around the world of ESO with different artifacts. The members all draw on cultural, historical, and experiential knowledge, and their opinions differ at times, and their conclusions change throughout the course of the analysis as those with more knowledge weigh in. The Antiquities system, however, is still a game made for popular consumption, and it needs to contend with the fact that there's a need for player appeal. This creates some problems. Archaeologist and antiquarian are used interchangeably, and there's a very strong cabinet of curiosities-esque flavor to it, which unfortunately creates a lingering association with imperial archaeological stereotypes. This is furthered by the fact that the player can keep the objects from the dig sites, even though there are in-game museums which are notable because they're all run by local communities. Players can also choose to sell these artifacts, often for a substantial sum, and those objects that cannot be sold can be used, again, in a very almost colonial way to decorate their home. Now, the Antiquities system, it still has tremendous potential to engage with a wide audience and to introduce them to basic archaeological concepts on an incredibly wide scale. It normalizes careful excavation over hasty, aggressive digging, and it prioritizes research and extended analysis and an open dialogue between scholars, especially consultation with the community and the presence of multiple voices in the telling of a people's history. In the future, the written record and the oral history within the Elder Scrolls franchise will be compared with the extant data recovered from the Antiquities system so as to do a more holistic examination of the Elder Scrolls history. This will then be compared with the digital environment. The end goal is hopefully to be able to see just how archaeology truly fits into the world of the Elder Scrolls so as to be able to compare it to other franchises. Thank you very much.